It seems my mother-in-law discovered that we'd bought a house when she suddenly called with a proposal that caught me completely off guard. On the other end of the line, I could hear my sister-in-law's laughter, light and amused, as my mother-in-law casually suggested she move in with us. Was she trying to be subtle, or did she think I wouldn't notice the humor in her voice? Living with my mother-in-law, or anyone from that side of the family, for that matter, was the last thing I wanted. I assumed Mason felt the same way, but now that they knew about our new home, were they expecting us all to live together? The thought of Mason agreeing to this, of him siding with them, made my stomach churn, but I refused to back down. If they were trying to manipulate me, I was ready to flip the script. I steeled myself. I've faced challenges before, and I could face this one too. I'm Nancy Deborah, 32 years old, a financial executive with a major corporation. I married Mason 4 years ago. We haven't had children yet, and while some may wonder, it's a decision we've made together, carefully and thoughtfully. Mason and I have always been focused on our careers. We're working hard to build a solid foundation before adding any other big commitments. We agreed we would revisit the idea of starting a family once we've reached the goals we've set for ourselves professionally. As we worked toward that future, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we'd come. Recently, a project I'd poured my heart into at work had been a huge success, and my promotion was finalized. With it came a significant pay raise. Mason didn't get promoted, but he was also rewarded with a nice raise, thanks to his dedication over the years. With both of our salaries increasing, it felt like the perfect moment to take the plunge into homeownership. I decided it was time to talk to Mason about making our dream of owning a house a reality. "Hey, I think it's time we start thinking about buying our place," I said, looking over at him one evening. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Already? Wow, I've been thinking about it too, but I wasn't sure if I should bring it up since I haven't been promoted yet." "Don't worry about that," I assured him. "It's not about one of us earning more. Honestly, I was thinking we could even put the house in my name now that I'm making more." His face lit up. "Really? Well, if you're cool with it, then let's do it." "Great. Let's check out some model homes next weekend," I suggested. Mason's smile grew. "Absolutely, let's not let this chance slip away." In that moment, I felt so thankful to have him by my side. It confirmed, once again, that marrying him was one of the best decisions I'd ever made. A week later, we visited model homes, exploring different styles and layouts. Our excitement grew as we started envisioning what our future home would look like. We spent weekends drawing floor plans and researching everything we could online. A construction company we spoke to suggested we take a more hands-on approach with the design process. Instead of letting them do all the work, they recommended we develop our ideas so the house would truly reflect who we are. Mason and I loved the idea, even though we both admitted our knowledge of design was limited, but we were eager to learn and dive into the process. As we balanced this new project with our busy careers, we kept chipping away at it, researching and refining our vision. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a package, but when I opened the door, there stood my mother-in-law. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, surprised by the unexpected visit. Without a word, she stepped inside, slipping off her shoes as if she were already at home. Mason, hearing the door, came out of the kitchen. "Mom, what's going on? Didn't Nancy tell you? I spoke to her about it on the phone earlier," his mother said, looking puzzled. Mason turned to me. "Maybe you forgot to mention it?" "That's not it, Mom," I quickly interjected. "I've just been so overwhelmed with work lately, I didn't get around to it." "You're such a hard worker, Nancy," Mason added, "managing everything, both work and home. It's not easy." My mother-in-law smiled warmly. "You're lucky to have a husband like Mason. Your late father would have been proud of how he supports you." She turned to Mason and asked, "So, what brings you over today?" With a satisfied smile, she pulled a travel brochure from her bag, laid it flat on the table, and pointed to a page marked with a bright yellow post-it note. "Look, Mason, I've always dreamed of going to Niagara Falls. Would you take me there?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement, catching both of us completely off guard. Mason and I were momentarily speechless, staring at the brochure as she continued her pitch. "Come on, Mason, think of it as an act of filial piety," she added, noticing his stunned expression. "Wait a second, Mom, this is a bit sudden," Mason finally managed to say. "You could come too, Nancy," she added nonchalantly. "I was planning to ask Anna, but if Mason's coming, we could make it a family trip." Anna, of course, was Mason's sister. Mason blinked, still confused. "What are you talking about? Nancy's right here, and I can't just take time off from work like that. Besides, it feels a little strange for me to pay for your trip, and Anna's too." "That's not strange at all," she countered quickly. "Spending money on family is a good thing, don't you think?" she said, turning to me for support. Though taken aback, I stood my ground. Spending money on family is fine, but expecting us to foot the bill is another matter, I replied. Her expression shifted instantly. What are you saying? Are you implying I'm trying to extort money from Mason for this trip? I tried to keep my tone calm, choosing my words carefully. That's not what I meant, but it did sound like you were expecting us to pay for everything, I explained. That's horrible, Nancy, I would never do that, she exclaimed, her voice rising in indignation. Now you're making me look like the villain in front of Mason. I didn't mean to make you out to be the villain, I quickly reassured her. I was just responding honestly to what you said. Okay, no need for excuses, Nancy. Why are you so heartless? You must not like me, do you? She accused, narrowing her eyes in a cold glare. This wasn't the first time I'd felt this way during one of her visits. More often than not, she'd find some way to ask for money, which she would then squander with Anna. While offering support to family isn't inherently wrong, this situation often felt more like coercion. Mason had been more than generous with them in the past, giving them money out of a sense of obligation, but I'd never been comfortable with their demands. Mason had confided in me that after his father passed away, his mother and sister became much more self-serving. His father had always been the one to manage their finances carefully, but after his death, there was no one left to keep them in check. They used up the life insurance money without hesitation. Anna, who works part-time and earns a modest salary, often used her financial struggles as an excuse to ask for help. She would show up at our door, claiming she was having a tough time and needed a break, always with the unspoken implication that she expected money from Mason. Before we married, Mason was constantly at the mercy of his mother's demands. She'd become dependent on him, especially after his father passed away, and he'd always been the one to support her. But since we've been together, he started seeing through their tactics. Though they frequently asked for money, Mason had recently become more firm in refusing. He was learning to stand his ground, especially when his mother made biting comments like, "You don't like me, do you?" Or, "Why should I be nice to such a cold daughter-in-law?" This time, he didn't hold back. "Just because you're my mother doesn't mean you can talk badly about Nancy. Didn't she just answer your question honestly?" Mason said firmly. His mother recoiled. "You're taking Nancy's side now?" she asked, her voice filled with shock. "I'm saying this because I believe it's true, Mom," he replied, not backing down. She seemed taken aback. This wasn't a conversation she was used to having. Her face twisted with frustration, and after a long silence, she finally snapped, "Fine," and stormed out of the room. Once she left, Mason let out a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry, Nancy. I hate that she makes you feel this way." "It's okay," I reassured him. "You stood up for us. I appreciate that. Once we have our own place, we'll be farther away. Maybe that'll help us avoid situations like this in the future." He smiled, relieved. "Yeah, that would be a huge relief." The house we were looking at was farther away than our current apartment, which would be a blessing in more ways than one. Right now, we lived only 4 train stations away from Mason's parents' house, but the new house would be 3 times farther and require multiple transfers. The route was a bit tricky, too, so unless we gave them the address, they wouldn't be able to find it. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to distance ourselves from the constant demands of his family. 3 months after submitting our floor plan ideas, construction on our $800,000 dream home finally began. 8 months later, it was complete. With both of our schedules still as hectic as ever, we found time to pack up our things. A few days before the move, as I was in the middle of packing, I got a call from my mother-in-law. I put the phone on speaker, trying to keep my hands free. "Hello," I answered, trying to sound calm. "Nancy, when are you moving? You bought a house, right? I want to live with you," she blurted out, her voice unusually high-pitched, catching me completely off guard. In the background, I heard Anna, my sister-in-law, laughing. "Oh, perfect. We can make Nancy do all the work every day." "Mom, you're a genius," Anna snickered. Did they really think I couldn't hear them? It was clear they were planning to take advantage of our move, picturing an easy life at our expense. To be honest, living with them was the last thing I wanted, and I was sure Mason felt the same way. But now that they knew about the new house, I worried they assumed we'd all be living together. The idea that Mason could be in on this plan made my stomach churn, but I wasn't about to let them dictate our lives. If they thought they could manipulate us, they had another thing coming. I'd be prepared. I told them our moving date, and immediately my mother-in-law and Anna laid out their plans. "We'll come to your apartment that afternoon. You'll take us with you in the car and make sure the movers handle our things too," she demanded, then hung up without waiting for a response. I was seething. Of course, there was no way I was going to do any of that. Just as I was about to talk to Mason, I turned around to find him standing right behind me. "Mason, were you listening?" I asked, my voice tight. "I was just about to take a break and talk to you about it. Was that Mom on the phone?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Yes, it was, and I need to know, why did you tell her about our new house? I asked, a bit surprised and unsure how to feel. Mason sighed deeply. It's not like that, he said, looking regretful. Last time Mom was over, she saw the floor plan lying around. She's been pestering me about it ever since. I finally gave in, he admitted, clearly upset with himself. I'm sorry, Nancy. You don't think I want to live with them, do you? He asked quickly. Of course not, Mason, I reassured him, relieved that we were on the same page. Still, after that phone call, I started to wonder if cutting ties with them was the best course of action. Mason's expression darkened. He looked more furious than I'd ever seen him. It was clear he was on my side, and that gave me a deep sense of relief. He explained that his mother had been relentlessly probing him about the details of our new home, pretending to ask casual questions about the number of rooms and other specifics. Her intentions were obvious, and the whole situation only strengthened our resolve. We agreed that it was time to set boundaries. Our new life together needed to be protected from their overbearing influence. I had reached my limit with her constantly overstepping and causing drama. Now, it was time to take control and make it clear that we wouldn't tolerate this anymore. The moving day arrived. Mason and I had arranged for the movers to come in the morning, and after they had finished unloading, we drove to our new home. By the time we had everything arranged, it was already past 2 p.m. We took a well-deserved break, but when we checked our phones, we saw dozens of missed calls from my mother-in-law. Mason had received calls too, his voice weary as he told me. Just then, as if on cue, my mother-in-law called again. I answered, leaving the phone on speaker. Hello, Nancy, where are you? I told you I'd be at the apartment this afternoon, didn't I? She asked, her tone sharp. Yes, you did say that, I replied calmly. So, what can I do for you? She huffed impatiently. What do you mean? What can you do? You didn't arrange for the movers, and I've been waiting at home with no sign of them. I had to come to your apartment myself. Is that so? I said, keeping my tone steady. Well, that's unfortunate. You know, I didn't arrange for any movers. What? That's not the deal. Where's your new house? I told you. I'll be at the apartment, she demanded, sounding increasingly flustered. Do you really think I'd tell you? I said, my voice firm and unyielding. A stunned silence followed on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her reeling, probably thinking that as long as Mason was involved, she could twist the situation to her advantage. But Mason had changed. He was no longer the passive son she could manipulate. Now, he was my staunch ally, resolute in cutting ties with his toxic family. I let all my pent-up frustration spill out. Let me be clear, neither Mason nor I have any intention of living with you two. From now on, please stay out of our lives. What do you mean? Her voice rose in shock. Your opinion doesn't matter. It's Mason's decision. At least tell me where the new house is. I shot back. And how exactly are you planning to get here without even knowing the address? I paused, letting the weight of my words land. This house is in my name. I get to decide who lives here. If you try to show up uninvited, that's trespassing. There was a long silence, and I could feel her shock through the phone. She hadn't expected me to push back like this, but the power dynamic had shifted. Mason and I were taking control of our lives, and she was realizing it. And just so you know, I added with finality, if you trespass, I'll sue. Her response came quickly, filled with outrage. Trespassing? How dare you say that about your husband's family? It was then that Mason's voice cut through, calm yet laced with an emotion I hadn't heard before, anger. Family? He said coldly. The only family I respected was my father, and he's gone. What's left doesn't even resemble the family I once knew. What are you saying, Mason? His mother stammered, her voice faltering in disbelief. At that moment, Mason's resolve hardened. Just sharing blood doesn't make you family, he said firmly. From now on, my family is Dave and Nancy. I don't consider you two part of it anymore. Wait, Mason, don't say that. Her voice cracked, pleading, but it was too late. Don't ever contact us again, Mason declared, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. He ended the call abruptly, blocking her number before she could respond. I looked at him, unsure but supportive. Mason, are you really okay with this? He exhaled deeply, a weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. Yeah, he said with a sense of finality, his face relaxing. I've been used for so long, I didn't even realize it. I feel free now. That was the turning point for us, our first true victory as a couple. We had severed the unhealthy ties with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law once and for all. With Mason cutting off all financial support, they were left to fend for themselves. My sister-in-law's part-time job wasn't enough to cover their needs, and my mother-in-law, who had been a housewife for years, was forced to find a job, but she wasn't prepared for the working world. Her new role was tough, and she quickly became the subject of disapproval at her job. Meanwhile, Mason and I settled into our peaceful new life. No more surprise visits from my mother-in-law. No more manipulative demands. Our lives felt genuinely stress-free, and I couldn't be more grateful to Mason for standing by me and having the courage to finally cut ties with his toxic relatives. Whatever challenges the future holds, I know we'll face them together, supporting one another every step of the way.